where is God when bad things happen? This is, of course, a really challenging question. And one thing that's for sure is getting a PhD in theology doesn't help you answer it any better.
But in moments like these, we have all kinds of feelings, all kinds of hurts and pains, struggles. But one of the more common ones is to begin to ask God, why? Why this flu? Why this situation? Why aren't you doing something else? Why don't you get your hands out of your pocket and do something? Right? And out of that comes some anger towards God, some confusion about God, some struggle with God. And that's okay. It's okay to struggle with God. In fact, that's what the name Israel means, right? The one who struggles with God. That's how Jacob got that new name. He struggled with God for a night. And God blessed him out of that, but he also gave him a limp. Jacob, he limped for the rest of his life, but he was also blessed out of that. So struggling with God is not a new thing. It's not a bad thing. In fact, it's good to struggle with God.
I'm probably not going to be visiting my parents tomorrow as planned, precisely out of fear for infecting them. I mean, that I could be a bearer. And yet at the same time, they very much need my support at this moment because of the grief that they're going through.
I think my first thoughts when you ask the question, I was like, I mean, this is not a new question. This question is as old as humanity is, or as our faith is. Why, Lord? How long, O Lord? As in Psalm 13. This is something I think we all encounter regularly in our lives. I can't imagine anyone being on the journey of faith who doesn't every now and then just ask question.
Ask the question, where is God in this? I think there's a way in which we can say we don't have an answer to that. And then there's another response that says, yeah, I can see where God is. On the one hand, we don't know where God is in one sense. We don't know why God is allowing this or why God has created the world the way that it is created. I don't know the answers to those kinds of questions. I can't give you a rationale. And anybody who thinks they know a rationale, they don't really know it. If they say, oh, this is because God's punishing us, they don't know that. They're not a prophet. They can't tell. They can't see inside God's head. So I think we have to have a certain kind of humility before God that says, I don't know. Why?
There are no straightforward answers to these questions, and there's no, as it were, a calculus which will provide us with the answers.
We're not always informed, specifically in the Bible, when these kind of or why these kind of things occurred. If you consider the story of Genesis, for instance, the 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine, nothing in the narrative says as to why there was going to be 7 years of famine. God doesn't say anything about being punitive or not. And of course, the book of Job wrestles with a lot of this kind of question, why is this happening? And when push comes to shove, there is sort of an unsatisfactory kind of answer in that we really don't know.
My answer would be, I don't know, but I believe that we can trust God. It would not be an answer like, God can't help it, or I can see clearly that God is trying to teach you a lesson. Those two are extreme answers, which really we can't know. And the honest answer is, we don't know why God allows and works the way that God does.
The fact is, if, like me, you're a Christian who believes that God has created everything and that his sovereignty rules over all, even when I don't understand precisely how that works, and certainly wouldn't imagine that I could answer all the questions why. If you believe that, then you have to let God stay on the hook. God, if we believe God created all this and that he has it all in his hands, and there's a sense in which the buck stops there, and that a faithful response acknowledges that. And I think that's why Scripture even includes some tips and tricks and strategies for what to do when you're feeling like you want to complain at God for what's happening. We've got Psalms of Lament that do that very thing. We have books like Job, which explore the same kind of question. Ecclesiastes, maybe, who does so in a little bit different way.
When struggling with God and we get these questions and we're asking God why and how long and why don't you do something, those are the prayers of Israel. The laments of Israel, the Psalms or the Lamentation or Jeremiah or Job, all the laments of Israel ask these same kind of questions. And they express this kind of bewilderment and confusion and anger with God. It's okay. God invites us. I think that's part of our response is God invites us to speak our hearts and to speak how we really feel and to tell God what's going on inside. I mean, God already knows, right? We're not going to do anything by hiding it from God because God already knows how we feel. But God invites us to speak it. So my first response as I think about this in terms of the struggle with God, my first response is speak it. Tell God. And the Psalms are filled with it. Psalm 10, verse 1. Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? Or Psalm 13. How long, O Lord? Will you forget me forever? How long must I have sorrow in my heart every day? So the Psalms do this over and over again. And Israel, almost half the Psalms are lament. Struggle is not an unusual thing. It is part of the life of a believer, right? So I think the first thing is to speak it.
The writers of the Bible did not speculate about the problem of suffering in the abstract as if God wasn't already there listening to them. If we read the Psalms, we see God not talked about in the third person. Why would God allow this? Why is God allowing this? Where is God in this? The Psalms always address God in the second person. They talk to God about their suffering. For example, Psalm 13 is one of the ones we've been focusing on recently. It just begins by very honestly saying, where are you, God? Why are you? How long will you forget me? It doesn't expect that there's going to be a quick or easy or immediate answer to that question, but it brings that question to the right place, which is before the throne. It's before God. That's where the question ought to be. And I think when the question is there, it can transform our perspective and make us see our own suffering in a different way, even if it doesn't give us a clear answer.
But the fact is, they all speak to a resource in Scripture that equips us to be open and honest with God about our concerns, about our complaints, about our doubts, and about our frustrations. I think sometimes the most faithful response is to go to God and tell him exactly how we feel about those things. Spend time with God in prayer, complaining a little bit about this virus and about the fact that some of the most vulnerable among us are at greatest risk, and that about the fact that some of us who want to help feel that our hands are tied in certain ways. And that's very frustrating, that our loved ones are afraid, There are many reasons, I think, why we might have some legitimate complaints. So where do you go with those? Do you stuff those down and pretend like they don't exist? That's not healthy spiritually. Do you run away from God altogether? Well, that's an option for sure, but that's not the option you have to take, because God actually equips us, and I think gives us permission to come to Him with any concern that we might have, with all of our wrestlings, with all of our doubts, and all of our complaints. And I think God, as our loving parent, would prefer that we do that, that we come to Him and ask those questions.
There's a place for asking these questions very much, as we see in, for instance, the Psalms. And it is good to cry out, I think, to the Lord, asking those why questions, because, well, then that's a sort of, in that direction, we're kind of already then oriented towards the giver of life and the giver of everything. And there are no easy answers.